I never thought one borrowed dress would change the direction of my entire life, but looking back now, I realize the moment I agreed to help my cousin that night, everything I thought I knew about myself began to shift. It started as something small, something harmless, something meant to be kept between us. But secrets never stay small for long, not when they stir something inside you that you've spent years pretending you don't feel. The party was supposed to be her problem, not mine. She had sprained her ankle that morning, panicked because the event she had been preparing for was too important to miss, and she didn't want people to think she skipped it. She was dramatic, persuasive, and frighteningly good at convincing me to do things I normally wouldn't. She planned it all like she had been waiting for the chance. She said, "Just go in my place, just show up, just let people see a glimpse of me so they don't ask questions, just keep your head down, just smile a bit, nobody will look too closely, the lights will be dim." But she knew what she was asking, and I should have known it too. I remember sitting on the edge of her bed while she pulled open her closet, sorting through outfits with the seriousness of someone performing heart surgery. When she finally held up the dress, soft, flowing, a deep shade of wine that caught the light in strange, beautiful ways, I froze. She looked at me like she knew I wasn't going to say no. Maybe some part of me already liked it, though I didn't admit it then. She brushed my hair, styled it carefully, added just enough makeup to soften the angles of my face, and when she stepped back, she didn't laugh, didn't make a joke, didn't treat it as something silly. Instead, she whispered, quietly but with certainty, "You look good. Too good, actually. Maybe the world is about to see something neither of us expected." I tried to protest, but inside my chest there was something almost electric, something between fear and curiosity. I told myself I was only doing this for her. I told myself it meant nothing. But as soon as I stood in front of the mirror, everything inside me went strangely silent, like I was looking at a version of myself I didn't know existed yet had been waiting for me. I didn't know how to describe it. I still don't. I only know that my reflection didn't feel wrong. By the time I got to the party, the sun was already setting, and the house lights glowed warm against the cool evening air. Music thumped through the walls, and laughter spilled out from the windows. I took a deep breath, smoothing the dress the way my cousin had shown me, and walked inside. At first it was easy to blend in. People brushed past me, smiling, nodding, too absorbed in their own conversations to notice someone quiet slipping through the room. The soft lighting helped. The music helped. My nerves didn't. I kept telling myself not to overthink, not to panic, not to run. But then someone called out to me from across the room. I turned, heart stopping, and there he was, someone I vaguely recognized from school, someone who had always carried himself with an easy confidence that I envied. He didn't look like someone who would ever notice me, at least not in my normal life. But tonight wasn't normal. Tonight I wasn't me. Or maybe I was more myself than usual. I still don't know which one is true. He walked toward me with a smile that was soft but searching, like he was trying to place me in his memory. I felt the panic rising in my chest, but he spoke first. "I haven't seen you here before," he said, and there was no suspicion in his voice, only curiosity. It should have terrified me. Instead, something inside me relaxed. I heard myself responding in a voice I barely recognized, quieter, smoother, but still mine. "Just here for a bit," I said, and he nodded like that was enough. We talked longer than I expected. About the music, about the classes we were both struggling through, about how loud the room felt and how neither of us actually liked these kinds of events but had somehow been convinced to show up. He laughed at small things I said, and the sound of it made my stomach twist in a way I didn't understand. Not attraction, not exactly, more like the unsettling realization that someone was seeing me, really seeing me, and didn't seem to find anything strange. But the longer we talked, the more I began to worry. I couldn't let him get too close. I couldn't let the illusion break. And yet, every time I tried to step away, he found some gentle way to draw me back in. Not pushy. Not demanding. Just interested. When he asked if I wanted to step outside for a moment where it was quieter, my instinct was to run. But my feet betrayed me. We walked out to the porch, the cool air brushing against my skin, the world suddenly quieter than it had been all night. He leaned against the railing and looked at me with a seriousness that caught me completely off guard. You seem familiar, he said, but I can't figure out why. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. He noticed. He didn't comment, though. Instead, he asked if I was okay. Something about how gently he said it made it impossible to lie. I told him I wasn't supposed to be here for long. I told him it was complicated. I didn't tell him the truth, not yet. But he didn't push. He just nodded, accepting the half answers I offered. He told me I didn't have to explain anything if I didn't want to. And maybe that was the moment I realized he wasn't falling for who I was pretending to be. He was falling for the version of me that I didn't know how to admit existed. And that terrified me more than anything else. When he asked for my name, the real one formed on my tongue, but the name my cousin used slipped out instead. It felt easier. Safer. But something in his expression softened when he heard it, and I knew the lie had just become real in a way I hadn't anticipated. He said it again, softly, like the name itself mattered to him. My chest tightened. We talked until the music inside faded and the night grew colder. At one point, he reached out instinctively as I shivered, placing his jacket around my shoulders. The gesture made my breath stop. Not because of him, but because of me. Because of how natural it felt. Because I didn't want to step away. But I had to. I told him I needed to leave, and he asked if he would see me again. The question hit harder than it should have. I looked at him, at the hope in his eyes, at the quiet sincerity in his voice, and I felt something inside me twist painfully. I told him maybe. I told him I wasn't sure. I told him the night had been unexpected for me too. Walking away felt heavier than it should have. I kept expecting him to call after me, but he didn't. He let me go with the same gentleness he had shown me all night. When I stepped into the car and finally looked at myself in the mirror, my makeup smudged, my eyes uncertain, I didn't recognize the person staring back, and yet, at the same time, I had never felt more aware of who I might be. When I got home, my cousin was waiting, excited, eager to hear everything. But when she saw my face, she stopped talking. Something happened, didn't it? She whispered. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know how to explain that someone had seen me, really seen me, and I didn't know which version of me he had fallen for. Or which one was real. 4 days after, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he spoke to me, about how he treated me like I belonged there, like the version of me he met wasn't strange or out of place. And then the message came. He had figured out my cousin's social profile, thinking it was mine, and sent a simple line, I meant what I said. I'd really like to see you again. My cousin looked at me and said the words that finally broke something open inside me, I think he fell for you. Not the disguise. Not the dress. You. And maybe it's time you figure out what that means. I don't know where things will go from here. I don't know what I'm ready for or what I'm still afraid of. All I know is that the night I went to the party as her was the first time someone looked at me and saw something that felt real. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I saw it too. For a long time I just stared at the message, the words glowing softly on my screen like they were waiting for me to confess something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I'd really like to see you again. My cousin sat next to me, her hand hovering near my arm like she expected me to break apart at any second. I felt strangely calm though, a quiet kind of storm where everything feels still right before the wind hits. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know whether to smile or panic, whether to delete the message or answer it. Part of me, the part that wanted the night to be nothing more than a one-time secret, told me to forget everything, to move on, to pretend it didn't matter. But another part of me, the part that still felt his jacket on my shoulders, the part that remembered the way he looked at me without suspicion or judgment, was louder than I expected. My cousin finally broke the silence. You don't have to decide right now, she whispered. But don't lie to yourself about what you felt. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself wondering what he saw that made him want to see me again. What version of me had he fallen for? The borrowed one? The accidental one? Or the real one I didn't fully understand yet? I put my phone down and pressed my hands against my face. I told my cousin it wasn't supposed to go this far. She nodded like she had already expected me to say that. I know, she whispered. But maybe it was supposed to go somewhere. Maybe that's the part you don't see yet. I didn't answer her. I didn't know how to. That night, I barely slept. The message kept replaying in my mind, over and over, echoing each time with more weight. I'd really like to see you again. The funny thing was, the longer I thought about it, the less the panic felt like fear and the more it felt like possibility. Terrifying possibility, yes. But possibility nonetheless. The next day, while brushing my teeth, I caught my own reflection and froze. The person looking back at me wasn't the girl from the party, not exactly, but she wasn't the version of me I had been before either. Something had shifted. Something I couldn't ignore. I spent minutes just staring at myself, trying to understand the unfamiliar comfort spreading through me. My hair, still slightly styled from the day before, fell differently. My posture looked different. Or maybe it was just my mind finally starting to admit things it had pushed aside for years. By afternoon, the pressure became too much. I picked up my phone, opened the message, and stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers shook as I typed the simplest possible reply, "Maybe we can talk." I hesitated for a long moment, then hit send before fear could stop me. He responded faster than I expected. Almost immediately. I felt my heart jump. Of course. When's good for you? I froze again, realizing I hadn't thought that far ahead. I didn't know if he expected me to show up as the girl from the party or as myself. The question alone made my stomach twist. Did I even know what myself meant anymore? Before I could overthink it too badly, he sent another message. No pressure. Really. Just want to talk. That helped a little. Not completely. But enough. I told him I'd let him know soon, and he replied with a simple okay that somehow felt sincere. For 2 days, I wrestled with the uncertainty. My cousin tried to help, but every suggestion she gave me felt like a choice I wasn't ready to make. One night, she sat on the carpet while I paced the room, ranting about how unfair everything felt. Why did he have to be kind? Why didn't he ignore me like everyone else usually did? Why did it matter so much? Because you wanted to be seen, she finally said. And he saw you. I stopped walking. The truth in her voice felt heavier than anything she had said before. I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. Something in me wanted to be seen. Not just as a costume or a disguise, but as the person I was becoming even if I didn't understand who that person was yet. That night, I told him I could meet up. Just somewhere quiet. He suggested a small cafe near the park, not crowded, not noisy. It sounded safe enough. But as the day approached, my nerves grew tighter until they felt like they were cutting into me. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know if I should show up as the version he met or the version I had been before. The morning of the meetup, I sat on my bed staring at 2 outfits laid out in front of me. One was just my usual clothes, simple, plain, comfortable enough. The other was something my cousin had suggested, something softer, something in the middle. Not quite one identity, not quite another. Something that felt like a bridge. I didn't expect to choose it. I didn't expect my hands to reach for it. But they did. I didn't look like her from the party. But I didn't look like the old me either. I looked like someone trying to understand themselves. Someone taking a small step even if they didn't know where the next one would lead. And maybe that was enough. When I reached the cafe, my hands were shaking so badly I almost turned back. But then I saw him sitting by the window, tapping his fingers nervously against the table, looking up every few seconds as if searching for someone. The realization hit me harder than I expected. He was nervous too. That alone made something inside me unclench. When I approached, he looked up and for a second, confusion flickered across his face. Not disappointment. Not suspicion. Just confusion as he tried to connect the version he remembered to the version in front of him. And then something softened. A slow, almost relieved smile spread across his face. "Hey," he said quietly, like he didn't want to scare me away. I sat down across from him, feeling like I was stepping into a moment I had spent my whole life preparing for without knowing it. We talked. Not about the party at first. Not about the disguise or the dress or anything complicated. We talked about normal things: school, music, stupid teachers, embarrassing moments we had both lived through. He made me laugh before I realized I could. He looked at me like he was piecing together a puzzle, not judging the shape of any one piece. Finally, after nearly an hour, he leaned back and spoke with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "I knew you looked familiar. I just couldn't figure out why." I swallowed hard, my pulse loud in my ears. My voice shook as I told him the truth: not everything, not the full story, but enough. Enough to be honest. Enough to be vulnerable. He listened without interrupting, his expression steady, calm, thoughtful. When I finished, he didn't look confused or angry or betrayed. He just nodded slowly. "So that night, you were helping someone else?" I nodded. "But it wasn't that simple. And I think you know that." His voice was quiet, careful, but real. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know how to explain the confusion twisting inside me. But he didn't ask me to. Instead, he said something I didn't expect. "I like the version of you I saw that night. But I also like the version I'm seeing now. You don't have to choose for me. Just choose for yourself." Something in me cracked open. Not broken, just open. Like a window that had been stuck for years finally shifting enough to let air in. We talked more until the sun started to set, and when we finally stood up to leave, he paused, looking uncertain for the first time. "Can we do this again?" "Only if you want to." I hesitated, but not because I didn't know the answer. The truth was already settling softly inside me. I nodded. He smiled. And for the first time since that night at the party, I felt like the fear inside me wasn't dragging me backward anymore, it was pushing me forward. After that second meeting, everything in my life began to feel like it had two layers. On the surface, nothing had changed. I woke up each morning, brushed my teeth, went to classes, pretended like everything was as ordinary as it had always been. But beneath the surface, deep inside the quiet moments when no one was watching, something was shifting. Not fast, not dramatic, but steady like water carving its way through stone. It wasn't the kind of change I could point to. It wasn't something I could explain easily, even to myself. It was more like I was slowly becoming aware of a truth that had been waiting patiently for me to stop running from it. The days after our cafe meeting passed with a strange softness. He didn't overwhelm me with messages or questions. He didn't push. He didn't try to define anything. Every few hours, I'd see a simple text from him, nothing intense, nothing demanding. Just things like "hope your day's going okay," or "the sunset looks really nice today," or "I found a new song you might like." They shouldn't have meant much, but somehow they did. It was the consistency that got to me. The way he showed up gently, steadily, as if he wanted to be a presence without taking up space. My cousin noticed the way my mood shifted. She didn't make fun of me. She didn't tease. She just watched, patient and quiet, like she knew something delicate was unfolding and she didn't want to disturb it. One evening she sat across from me as I stared at my phone, waiting for a reply from him even though I hadn't admitted that's what I was doing. She finally said, "You're allowed to like being seen. You don't have to punish yourself for it." I didn't answer. But the words stayed with me. It took a few days before he suggested meeting again. This time he didn't choose a cafe or a quiet indoor spot. Instead, he asked if I wanted to walk through the park near the river. It was a place I'd been dozens of times, but that day it felt different, maybe because I wasn't sure which version of myself I was supposed to be. That morning, I took longer getting ready than I expected. Not because I wanted to impress him, but because I wanted to feel aligned. My cousin helped again, only this time she stayed quieter than usual. She let me choose what felt right. I ended up wearing something similar to last time, soft, simple, not too feminine but not the old version of me either. Somewhere in the middle, somewhere that felt like breathing. When I arrived at the park, he was sitting on a bench near the water, tapping his heel against the ground in a rhythm that made it obvious he was trying to calm his nerves. It surprised me, someone like him, someone so confident, looking just as uncertain as I felt. When he noticed me, he stood up with a small smile that wasn't perfect or polished but real. We started walking, letting the silence hang for a while because for once it didn't feel uncomfortable. The wind carried the scent of water and distant flowers, and the late afternoon sunlight reflected on the river like scattered coins. At one point, he asked how I'd been, and I told him truthfully, confused, overwhelmed, but not in a bad way. He nodded, like he understood without needing details. After a moment, he took a breath and said something that made my heart stop. "I hope it's okay that I like spending time with you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shrink away, to retreat into the version of myself that didn't owe anyone anything. But another part, the part growing louder each day, felt warmth spread through my chest. We stopped near the water where ducks drifted lazily across the surface. I looked down at my reflection, rippling softly with the movement of the river, and I realized I didn't look scared. Not fully. Not like before. He looked at my reflection too, then at me, and there was a hesitation in his voice when he spoke again. "You know, that night at the party, I didn't know what I was seeing. I just knew I wanted to know you. I still do." I swallowed hard. My voice came out quiet. "I'm not sure who I am yet." He nodded slowly. "Then we figure it out together. If you want that. If not, that's okay too." The sincerity in his voice hit me deeper than anything else he had said. He wasn't claiming he understood me. He wasn't promising anything impossible. He wasn't trying to name my confusion. He was simply offering to stay. And I realized how rare that was. We walked more, talking about completely unrelated things, movies, teachers, memories from when we were younger. The whole time, I kept waiting for him to slip, to show even a hint of discomfort or confusion about who he was walking beside. But he didn't. There were moments where I expected him to ask for clarity, to ask what I was becoming, to ask what I wanted to be called or how he should see me. But he didn't push at all. Instead, he matched my pace, emotionally and physically, as if he had already decided that the slow unfolding was the point. When the sun began setting, we sat on the grass, watching the sky turn orange and then purple. As we sat there, he said something so quiet I almost missed it. "Do you want to tell me the name you're comfortable with today?" He didn't say the name from the party, and he didn't ask for my old one. He left the question open, gentle, like he didn't want to force me in either direction. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, soft but heavy. In that moment, I realized a name wasn't the real question. The real question was whether I wanted to keep moving toward the version of me from the party, not as a disguise, but as a truth. I felt my hands tremble. I felt my breath catch. And I whispered the same name he had called me that night, not because it was perfect, but because it felt like a hand extended in the dark. He repeated it softly, carefully, as if protecting it. The way he said it made my chest tighten in a way that wasn't fear anymore. It was something else entirely. Something like recognition. We stayed there until the stars began appearing, and when we finally walked back toward the streetlights, I noticed something strange. People walked past us without staring. Without whispering. Without giving me that familiar look that had always made me shrink. For once, I didn't feel out of place. Before we parted ways, he hesitated again, shifting his weight like he was choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not asking for anything right now. Just, can I see you again? Only if it feels right. Only if it doesn't hurt you." I felt the truth rising in my throat, clear for the first time in weeks. I told him yes. He smiled, small, relieved, and unbelievably warm, and said goodnight. But as I walked home, the weight of everything finally hit me. The truth I had been circling around. The truth I had been too afraid to face. And when I stepped into my room and closed the door behind me, I sank onto the floor and let the quiet wash over me. For the first time, I whispered to myself the thing I had been afraid to say out loud. Maybe that night at the party wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was the beginning. The next morning felt strange in a way I couldn't describe at first. I woke up with sunlight sliding across my room, but instead of that familiar heaviness, I felt lighter. Not because everything was suddenly clear, not because I knew exactly who I was or who I was becoming, but because for the first time, I wasn't running from the questions anymore. And somehow that made the confusion feel less like a threat and more like a path. My cousin walked in without knocking, holding a mug of tea and wearing a look that was already half a smirk. I opened my mouth to complain about the lack of privacy, but she cut me off with a quiet, "So, how was it?" I rolled my eyes, but I could feel the warmth creeping up my neck. "It was fine," I said too quickly. She raised an eyebrow like she didn't believe a single word. "Just fine." I groaned and pulled a pillow over my face. She laughed softly. "You know," she whispered, "you don't have to hide the good things. You've spent years hiding everything else." I lowered the pillow slightly and met her eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sat down beside me and took my hand gently, the way she used to when we were kids and I was scared of the dark. "You're allowed to be happy," she said. "Even if it's messy. Even if it's new. Even if you don't understand all of it yet." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She squeezed my hand once more, then stood up. "Whenever you're ready, we can go through your closet again," she added casually. And then she left, closing the door softly behind her. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that, letting her words sink in. Happiness. Messy. New. I wasn't sure I deserved any of those things, but the thought of them made my chest feel warm. Still, a small part of me held on to fear. The fear of being found out. The fear of judgment. The fear of liking the version of me that wasn't meant to exist beyond that one party. Later that afternoon, he texted me. Not a long message. Not a dramatic one. Just, "I hope you slept okay." That was it. Simple. But it made me smile without thinking. We talked for a while, nothing heavy, nothing defining. Just conversation. Silly things. Little jokes. It felt easy in a way I didn't know relationships could feel. Not that we were anything. Not officially. Not spoken. But something was forming, and I felt it even if neither of us named it. He asked if I wanted to meet again, but I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I felt the weight of the next step pressing on my shoulders. If I kept going, if I kept letting him in, there would come a point where I couldn't hide behind uncertainty anymore. I would have to choose a direction. I would have to stand on one side of the truth. I didn't answer him right away. The next day, when I saw him by chance near the school's courtyard, I froze. I hadn't expected to run into him, especially not in such a public place. He noticed me before I could turn away, and the moment our eyes met, something in my stomach flipped. He offered a small, nervous wave. I hesitated, then waved back. But before I could reach him, I heard a group of boys nearby whispering. At first, I didn't think they were talking about me. But then one of them said something that made my blood run cold. "Isn't that the cousin from the party? Didn't someone say he was dressed like a girl that night?" My heart dropped. They didn't know. They didn't know it was me. But they were close. Too close. I tried to walk faster, but their voices followed like smoke. "Maybe he's into that stuff. I don't know, man. People are weird." The laughter that followed cut through the air. He heard them too. His face tightened, not in fear, but in a protective kind of anger. He stepped toward me, subtly placing himself closer like he wanted to shield me without making it obvious. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend it didn't bother me. But the memory of that night came rushing back, the way strangers had stared, the way whispers had followed me around the party like shadows. My breathing grew shallow. He must have noticed because he didn't ask again. Instead, he said softly, "Walk with me." We moved away from the courtyard, from the whispers, from the people who always noticed the wrong things. When we were far enough, he stopped and looked at me more seriously than he ever had before. "You don't deserve to feel afraid," he said. "Not for being yourself. Not for any of this." Something inside me cracked. I wasn't used to being defended. I wasn't used to someone choosing to stand beside me instead of stepping back in discomfort. I felt the sting of tears building, but I blinked them away. He didn't push. He didn't look away. He just waited, giving me space to breathe. Finally I said, "This is getting complicated." He nodded. "So is everything worth figuring out?" I swallowed. "What if people find out?" His expression softened. "Then let them. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Only yourself. His words were too gentle. Too true. They scared me because they made everything real. We sat on a low brick wall near the parking lot, watching people walk by. I kept expecting someone to stare, someone to point, someone to whisper. But no one did. And each second he didn't move away from me felt like a small miracle. Eventually, I stole a glance at him and whispered, "Why are you doing this?" He looked at me like the answer was the easiest thing in the world. Because I like who you are. Not the costume. Not the confusion. You. My throat tightened. I didn't know whether to run or stay. Somehow, I stayed. The next words slipped out of me before I could stop them. What if I'm not who you think I am? He took a slow breath, as if choosing every word with care. Then he said, maybe the real question is, what if you're more? My chest felt like it was collapsing and opening at the same time. More. Not less. Not wrong. More. For the rest of the afternoon, we walked without talking much. But the silence wasn't heavy. It felt like the space where something new was forming, something fragile, something neither of us wanted to break by rushing it. When we finally parted ways, he said see you later with the same gentle certainty that had unsettled me since the night of the party. And as I walked home, my cousin's words replayed in my head. You're allowed to be happy. But now there was a new voice layered over hers. Maybe you're allowed to become. The days that followed felt like living in two different worlds at once. In one, everything was normal, school, homework, the routines I had clung to for years. But in the other, every quiet moment, every reflection in a window or mirror reminded me of the person I had become, the person I had allowed myself to be when no one else was watching. I started noticing small changes, the way I walked, the way I held my shoulders, the way my voice carried a subtle softness that hadn't been there before. Not dramatic, not noticeable to anyone but me, but powerful. I felt different. And each day, the pull of that difference grew stronger. I texted him almost daily, though never enough to feel clingy, always carefully measured so that it felt natural. We talked about everything and nothing, shared music recommendations, memes, small confessions. It was like building something from scratch, but instead of cement and wood, we were using trust, curiosity, and patience. And every time he called me by that name from the party, I felt it settle deeper inside me, like a seed finally taking root. I wasn't pretending anymore. Not completely. And the thought terrified me. One evening, he suggested we meet after sunset by the river again. I hesitated. A small, panicked voice whispered inside me, what if someone sees us? What if it all collapses? What if he changes his mind? But the part of me that had been growing quietly since the party, the part that wanted to be seen, really seen, won. I agreed. When I arrived, the river shimmered under the last light of the day. He was already there, leaning against the railing like he had done the first time, waiting. I took a deep breath, smoothing the clothes I had chosen for the meeting, feeling more aligned with myself than I had in weeks. As I approached, he looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need words, that carried trust and patience and a quiet acceptance I had never known before. We walked along the riverbank, side by side, not talking at first. The water reflected the fading sky, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to shrink or hide. My footsteps felt lighter. Every instinct to retreat dissolved. I realized he didn't care about the uncertainty or the shifts inside me. He cared about me. Just me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe it. He paused and turned to me, his expression serious yet gentle. Do you feel different? He asked. I hesitated, thinking about the nights I had lain awake, thinking about the way I had looked in the mirror after the party, thinking about the slow changes in posture, voice, and thought. Yes, I whispered finally. I feel more. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but I feel more. He smiled softly. That's all that matters. I didn't have to have it all figured out. And in that moment, I believed him. The fear, the uncertainty, the shame I had carried for so long, it all seemed smaller somehow. Less heavy. And in its place was something I hadn't felt before, possibility. We stopped walking, standing at the edge of the water. The sky had deepened into a rich navy, the first stars twinkling faintly above. I turned to look at him, feeling the vulnerability rise like a tide. I wanted to tell him everything, the confusion, the borrowed dress, the nights I had hidden from myself, but the words felt impossible. And then he reached out his hand, not demanding, not asking, just offering. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed my hand in his. It fit perfectly. And just like that, the walls I had spent years building inside me began to dissolve. Not completely, not instantly, but enough that I could feel the warmth of trust spreading, enough that I could imagine a future where I didn't have to hide parts of myself anymore. We walked slowly, our hands loosely intertwined, saying little, feeling the quiet strength of being together without pretense. Every step I took, every laugh we shared, every glance exchanged felt like a small act of courage. And in that courage, I discovered the first real glimmers of freedom, the freedom to be seen, the freedom to be known, the freedom to become who I was meant to be. When we finally parted that night, he didn't hug me, didn't demand anything. He simply smiled and said, "See you soon." And I knew it was enough. Not the end. Not a beginning perfectly mapped out. But enough. Enough to know that I could embrace the transformation that had begun that fateful night at the party, the transformation that had nothing to do with a borrowed dress and everything to do with accepting myself. I walked home under the stars, hand in hand with the possibilities I had once been too afraid to imagine. For the first time, I felt whole. Not complete, not finished, but real. And that was more than I had ever dared to hope for. The borrowed dress had been the first step. But the real journey, my journey, was just beginning. And I was ready.